a dear friend that I have known since I was an undergraduate. We were together in college, and we met again as both professors in the University of Laverne. So we also, as you probably heard in our opening ceremony, Evy has been part of Gignes, and she helped us start it together with Alexis and Katerina. But now she's a retired psychologist and former professor of psychology and therapist in private practice. So she's going to start her round table. Here you go.
Is this on? Is this off?
Maybe you need to bring it a little closer to you.
I don't think I can.
Okay.
Okay. I started off with the passage that Evenia provided for us from Kazantzakis' book, Zorba the Greek. If you haven't read it, I'll just read it to you very quickly. Zorba said, "One day I had gone to a little village. An old grandfather of 90 was planting an almond tree." "What, Grandad?" I exclaimed. "Planting an almond tree?" And he, bent as he was, turned and said, "My son, I carry on, as if I am never going to die." I replied, "And I carry on as if I was going to die any minute." Which one of us was right, boss? My work has been with children. And as such, we didn't have too much to do with discussions of death. But children have taught me about the other given of life, the here and now. They never cease to amaze me that in the depths of their misery, they can still play if you give them a little bit of space and safety. They can be children again. And they live for that moment. And it is a beautiful thing to see. When I first read Kazantzakis' passage, I was all for Zorba. We have to go out there. We have to throw ourselves into life. We have to do everything. We have to dare everything. Today, possibly as a passage, with the passage of time, I am more in tune with the old almond planter. In my mind's eye, I can see him testing the soil with his fingers, picking up this little almond tree, feeling its bark, feeling its spring, feeling its promise. He's digging the soil. The sun is on his back. He feels the ache of his muscles, but he is so proud that he can still dig. And he puts that plant into the ground as a mother would put her baby into its cradle, and covers it with soil, and sprinkles it with water, and smells the odor of that water. He doesn't care if there will be almonds. He doesn't care if somebody is going to sit under the tree and say, "Oh, what a lovely tree this is," or "How much wonderful shade it brings." He's just enjoying the moment, breathing, feeling, and just being there. I never became a Zorba. But I had a dear, dear cousin who was one. He always believed in living 200% of time. He became a surgeon, and in between his surgeries and his patients and his studies and his research, he took the time to play, to ski, to swim, to laugh, to love, to go to concerts, classical concerts, jazz concerts, opera, to sing himself and cut records. He would take you to an Italian restaurant and he would order what he called a roulette. 7 types of pasta with 7 types of sauce. He would order all the desserts on the menu and enough spoons for all of us. So we could all just take a little bit and try it out. He was always late. He was never on time. He was always going somewhere. But the thing about Nicolas was that for the 10 minutes that he was with you, he was with you. And that is where I enjoyed you so much. He was there. You knew he was going to leave very soon. But nobody else existed for him in that moment in time. He was killed at the age of 52. He died in a plane crash. He and 7 other people had gone to Namibia to set up a station where people could get medical aid. All 8 of them walked off the plane, but he was fatally injured. He knew he was dying as he walked off the plane, and he died at the age of 52. And we miss him dearly. He was just irreplaceable in our lives, all of our lives. At his funeral, the cathedral in Lausanne was so full that people were outside the doors. His friends, his patients, his nurses, his students, all of us missed him so terribly and still miss him today. So, what I was wanting to say was that the way Nicolas lived, or the way the almond planter is, has nothing to do, for me, with death. I don't think that he was running away from the thought that he would die. He was just enjoying living, enjoying the so many ways of being in this world. Just as the almond planter is just enjoying his moment. Does the knowledge of death make things more valuable? Not in the everyday. I think in the everyday, maybe as Evenia says, we suppress. I'm sure it is a very valuable defense mechanism. But my goodness, there is so much to be said about just the joy of living, the joy of being, the joy of breathing, the joy of seeing, being with, being for, being in, are so wonderful. So it is good to be able to appreciate these moments, to validate them, to give them the value that they really have. And maybe not spoil them with thoughts of, well, how long will this last for? I don't know how many of you have children who have left home and they come for a visit, and you say, oh, they've come, and they've come for 5 days, and isn't that wonderful? And then you say they're 4, and 3, and 2, and 1, and you forget to enjoy them because you're counting the days before they go. And it's very upsetting. Having said that, I think that it is very difficult to cope with the knowledge that death is really imminent. Nicolas knew that he was dying. He knew that there was nothing that could be done for him. He told his girlfriend so. I don't know what else was going through his mind. Nobody can know. We were happy that he died and didn't live half a life where he could not be Nicolas any longer. Were we right? I don't know. He might have found a way of being despite it, or maybe because of it. Nobody can know that. But I would like to bring another example of my husband of 50 years, who was always talking to us about death very pragmatically, that it was going to happen, that it was a fact of life, that we should prepare for it, that we should not be afraid of it. He was diagnosed with cancer 2 years before he died. And we sat down with him and his doctor, and very lovingly and very mindfully agreed that we would not go in for heroics and surgeries and treatments and making his life a misery before it ended. And it was a conscious decision. And yet, when he became terminally ill, he became so angry, so furious that death was coming, that he turned on us. And he was vicious. And this is a man who had always been very gentle, very caring, very kind, very available. And it shocked us, and it shook us. And although at the end he was warm and loving and calm, I don't think any of us will ever forget his excoriating anger. It really ripped the skin off us. And it was a horrifying experience. So it is not easy to come to terms with dying. It is not easy to come to terms with somebody else close to us dying. I know that they are in me. I know that I carry them along with me. I can go back in my mind and bring them to me. I can hear their voices. But they're gone. And there is an emptiness that I think I found best expressed by King Lear. When I read that passage, it really resonated within me. Shakespeare has Lear carrying his dead daughter Cordelia in his arms. And he says, "Thou'lt never come again. Never, 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 never." Thank you.
Thank you, Evie, for this very touching presentation. I guess it made very clear in my mind why I have you so dear in my heart. always have a way of touching me. So, taking a deep breath. And moving to our next presenter, who is also very dear, although I don't know him for so many years. Our encounter has been a more recent encounter when he invited me to an APA symposium together with Erik, talking about the histories of life and becoming. And since then we have been able to keep in touch. And Will Wadlington is going to talk about aliveness in the face of death. He is a retired psychotherapist and former art professor who writes about psychotherapy process, creativity, and the legacy of Otto Rank. He also made a very nice presentation about Otto Rank. He was associate director of the Student Counseling Center at Penn State University, and he is currently doing academic research in Great Barrington in Massachusetts. So, Will.
The original plan was for me to go last, but we need to give Erik a little break after his keynote address. So this will seem even more inappropriate when you hear what I'm talking about. But, and transgressive, but that's part of who I am. So what I want to say is, this isn't fully formed. What I have to say is not complete, and it requires your participation or interpretation. So maybe you will be able to tell me what it means, what I'm saying, because I'm not really sure. But these are things that are important to me, and I thought I would talk about them. Humor is very difficult to address. Why is he talking about death at a Gadfly roundtable? Why humor at a death roundtable? Lionel Trilling said, irony is one of those words like love that are best not talked about if they're to retain any force of meaning. Humor in its various forms, irony, wit, buffoonery, caricature, is best not talked about. Ignoring this wise injunction, I will nevertheless talk about humor. I'm especially interested in humor in terms of its psychological function and response to the human existential situation. That sounds important anyway. This image has intrigued me for a long time. I actually am unsure of the date of this image. I'm guessing maybe 1500, maybe 1400. It's an image of the fool led away by death in cap and bells. You see, death is dressed like the fool is dressed. And death is escorting the fool to his fate. So one way I interpret this is, even humor is not going to save us. Death always succeeds. There's no way to avoid it. Even wit and cleverness are defeated. It's a common theme. There are other images similar to this. This particular image has been attributed to Albrecht Dürer. It's possible Dürer supervised the production of it rather than produced it himself. But it appears in Sebastian Brandt's Ship of Fools. Have you heard of that book, Ship of Fools? Famous Northern Renaissance book. I think of Ship of Fools as a DSM of types of foolishness. Here, death has the fool by the coattails. There's no getting away. There's a number of kinds of fools. This is a Northern Renaissance image of the fool by the Flemish artist Quentin Messes. You may notice the fool's scepter. There's a small figure who moons whoever looks. Sometimes fools carry baubles or scepters like this one. There are fools at court who mock royalty. The idea here is that playing the fool is a way to challenge authority, often without the authority knowing that they are being mocked. My question, if fools challenge authority, is death the ultimate authority? Had to have a reference to Greek comedy. And the ironist affects ignorance and triumphs over the stupid, self-deceiving braggart. Every Greek tragedy was followed by a lewd and funny satyr play, and Elizabethan tragedy almost always by a comic jig. And these plays end not only with the tragic individual's fated death, but with a comic return to social normalcy. Social normalcy is restoration of the self's equilibrium with the world, which has become a tragic place. Here's another fool. You may recognize this fool from the Tarot. This fool is at the edge of the abyss. Is he oblivious of danger and death? I leave this to your imagination and your interpretation. I always think of Carlos Castaneda standing on the edge of a cliff and Don Juan encouraging him to jump off, to trust. It will be all right. And here's a clown from the Fratelli family. We can laugh at ourselves as we watch a clown get into predicaments. Clowning imitates life in the sense that it often involves naivete or obliviousness. A contemporary clown says, it's about getting yourself into dilemmas. I don't have to look for them. They come my way. Pants too large, shoes too big. Something's bound to go wrong for the baggy pants clown. There's also an innocent kind of humor. A wonderful book called Cracking Up by Christopher Bolas, psychoanalytic thinker. He says that for the infant, mother is the first clown. She diffuses the power struggle between baby and mother, with making faces, laughing. And this is important. I've looked at this many times. This is the tombstone of Marcel Duchamp. I think of Marcel Duchamp as the most important 20th century artist. It's always the others who die. The idea here is that we can deny the reality of our own death. It's always the others who die. Now, it was Heidegger who spoke of death as a preeminent possibility. Believe me, there are others in this room, especially over that way, who know much more about Heidegger than me. But my understanding is that Heidegger thought authenticity was achieved through a recognition of the possibility of one's own death. Thus, being toward death is being toward the possibility that I may not exist just now. Duchamp never gave up the ironic perspective that pervades his work. And, irony is, again, a challenge to authority, and Duchamp was constantly challenging the authority of the art world. So again, Duchamp cleverly made sure that his irony would live even after his death. I'll let you read that. It's another version of the same sentiment from the great Brazilian writer who has been compared to Kafka. I understand this as being called to life, reminding us to live in spite of the reality of death. And you can read that. One of my favorite passages from Nietzsche. Looking down on ourselves from an artistic distance. We need that. At times we need that. And here's another expression of this need. Ron called it legitimate foolishness. And Ron linked it to what he called the natural self. Ron had a sense of humor. He loved irony. He loved Mark Twain, the writer, American writer. Legitimate foolish is a freeing of the self from fear and inhibition and allowing the natural self to evolve. This quotation is about the arch seriousness of psychoanalysis. This is by the French writer Roustan, who writes brilliantly. Roustan had become a Lacanian, and then he started to see Lacan as a charlatan, and wrote extensively after that about that perspective. And there's a wonderful essay by Roustan. It's called "How Do You Make a Paranoiac Laugh?" And the answer he gives in his essay is attention to the body and sensation and presence, bringing the person back to the present life. Psychoanalysis, though, may have taken itself too seriously, and it became a cold orthodoxy, and that's what Grodek was pointing to. Do you know who Grodek was? He used the word id, and Freud appropriated the word id from him. For Grodek, it meant the body. So I tried to summarize some of the ways I'm thinking about foolishness, especially the need for ironic perspective, maybe an alternative to cynicism. I could get pretty cynical at times, and feel a need sometimes to laugh at myself. So self-awareness is not taking myself too seriously. This is Bill Irwin. Have you ever seen his work? I guess you would call him a mime, but that doesn't really describe his clowning. He often appears as a baggy pants character. Here he's interacting with Zoom or Skype or WhatsApp, images of ourselves that we've all become so familiar with. Interestingly, Irwin is also quite experienced at performing in Samuel Beckett's existentially themed plays. Irwin has been in Waiting for Godot, for example. I thought that would get a laugh. What do I know? I hate reading captions. It says, Godot says, running late, frowny face, winky face. Running late. I'm intrigued by the realization that Beckett's themes, dread, despair, hopelessness, finitude, are best understood sometimes through the clownish ways of his characters. And have any of you seen Waiting for Godot? It was a classic, a very important play. But you can see the figures in that play in their clownish behavior, repetitive behaviors, and foolishness. This is a well-known painting by Rembrandt that is owned by the Metropolitan Museum in New York City. It is called Aristotle Contemplating the Bust of Homer. You could say it portrays the meeting of two worldviews, the philosophical and logical, and the mythic and poetic. Aristotle, by the way, wrote about the need for self-deprecating humor, the need to laugh at ourselves, for not taking ourselves too seriously. You actually can give yourself permission to laugh. This is a photograph by postmodern artist William Wegman. His work is very popular. Maybe you've seen his work before. He works with his dogs, Weimaraner dogs, poses them, and they're very obedient models and do what he wants them to do. So this is called, he named his first Weimaraner Man Ray, after the artist Man Ray. This is called Man Ray Contemplating the Bust of Man Ray. Wegman's dogs are postmodern clowns. They parody famous works of art, but they're just funny in themselves, in a way a child can understand. I just remembered when I said the way a child can understand. My oldest grandson's first story that he told me was Lola Knows Balloon. His dog was named Lola, and she apparently had an inflated balloon that she was bouncing on her nose. It was the funniest thing in the world to him. And that was his first, story. Komisch or Kozmish. We would like to think our last words before death are among the most meaningful things we will ever say. Otto Rank, on his deathbed, was heard to utter Komisch, or comical. My colleague Robert Kramer suggests that this word was misheard, that the actual utterance was kosmisch, or cosmic. Either way, Rank was saying something profound. But I am struck by the irony that even last words are at risk of being misheard or misunderstood. And that's comical. So, I've come to the end of my talk. Hopefully these are not my last words. And I appreciate your attention, and hopefully there'll be an opportunity for you to explain to me what I just presented.
I'm going to do my presentation first, and then we will conclude with Erik's presentation. Well, actually, this round table was a decision that we somehow took on a Zoom call, and it was a very interesting proposal on the part of Erik to really do something about death and how we experience somehow a more personal level. So I accepted the challenge. So
Which you never do.
which I never got.
What are you doing here?
So I think I'm going to make a personal presentation. A lot of people that know me know that I'm very interested in death, and that I bring it up a lot in our classes, and not only, but my interest in death is not a morbid one. I'm not interested in death because I'm a pessimist, or I don't enjoy life, or whatever of that sort. But my interest in death started from a very young age. Since I was a few months old, I was diagnosed with a chronic hereditary blood disorder that is quite common in the Mediterranean countries. And at the age of 3, I had to undergo a very serious operation, which was the first one of the kind in such a young person in Greece. So the doctors had given to my mother a prognosis of 1 in 100 that I would survive. But anyway, she got that one chance, and she said, well, I prefer to, that she has a healthy life rather than that she suffers. So let's do it. So the operation fortunately went well, and here I am. And of course, although the operation went well, this condition that I was having in the 1960s was considered fatal by adolescents. So that still the prognosis was not so great in terms of how long I was going to live. So death awareness was part of my life from very, very young. And it has always been there. But as I said, and that's why I appreciate George Weiland's work on coping mechanisms, somehow I seem to be able to also suppress the impact that this awareness had, and also to give me the spark or the impetus to try to make the best of whatever time I had. Because as Erik said in his keynote before, the only thing we have is time. And actually our time is borrowed time. We live on borrowed time, as another thalassemic friend of mine says. So this death awareness is something that I believe very much in what Heidegger is saying can help us live in a more authentic kind of way, in the sense that we have this kind of urgency that I should do what is important for me to do before it's too late. So I always had this in mind, and that's why probably I also got all of the challenges. And I don't want to miss on any challenge, and probably that's why you've seen my name in so many different roundtables during this Congress that even myself got bored of seeing it. But I thought, well, maybe this is going to be my last Congress, so I might as well do the best I can and grab every opportunity that was given. So what Evy brought with Zorba the Greek was also something that we were doing in Georganda with all of the work we did on Istros, or Zest for Life, which was an inspiration from a poem by Embirikos on Philolinon Street. And he writes somewhere that Greeks turned fear of death into zest for life. And that is true. This is how I experience things, that these death awareness, and that's why I used the word Gadfly. It's like what Socrates said in his Apology, that he was a gadfly to awaken his fellow citizens to a more authentic life. And this is, I think, what death is doing for us, if and when we allow it to really come into our consciousness and to realize, I might not be here tomorrow. There is no guarantee that I will be here tomorrow. This principle of impermanence that Ernesto Spinelli has been talking, and Erik brought in his discussion, in his keynote, is true. And it became so obvious with the pandemic. We don't know what is going to be next day. And that's why I also brought that little video on gratitude. Because every day is really given to us, and we need to appreciate every day and try to make as much as possible of it. So I am also aware from my personal experience that there is a danger with thinking too much about death or experiencing too much death. Because I did also go through a period of being a little paralyzed from my fear of dying. So as with everything, there are two sides to a coin. So I'm not suggesting that you constantly contemplate on death, although I have been reading on meditations on death. And it seems to be a practice that a lot of Buddhist monks are doing in terms of preparing themselves for the inevitable. But I am suggesting that from time to time, you pause. You give yourself some time and some space, which I think is also what psychotherapy is doing for us. To think about our existence, to think about our life. Because we live very often automatically. We are in the automatic pilot, and we just go and go and go and go, and we don't stop to think about, where am I going? And do I really want to be going where I'm going? Is this really how I want to be living my life? And is this really close to my heart? Is this really something that resonates with me? So I also like very much this idea of Alfred Langl about the inner consent. Do I say yes? I'm doing okay. I'm satisfied, because I also like very much in one of the recent interviews of Yalom, what he said, that he is somehow ready to die, and he's ready to die because he has no regrets. And I think that from a very young age, I always thought about that. Will I regret not doing that? Will I, are there things that I'm regretting that I haven't dared to do? And this is also what gave me the existential courage that we were talking in the courage symposium. To try to do the things that sometimes are scary for me, because I don't want fear to stop me from living life. Anyway, we're anyway going to die. Of course, I'm not suggesting we should do things that are dangerous for our life, but to not be hindered by fear in exploring our possibilities in life. So it is, my journey in life has been a long one compared to the possibilities I was given. So I'm very happy that I have reached 64, but I'm still not yet ready to die. I still would like to live more, but the question has always also been in my mind, when is the right time to die? And we have sometimes talked with Erik about that. And I like the suggestion that he makes that we should die at our peak. And it's an interesting idea because it is kind of difficult. And I have my mother, which some of you might have noticed, that she came to the opening ceremony that just turned 99. And she always tells me, getting old is the hardest thing in life. And I can see that. Getting old is very difficult. And it really stops us from being able to do a lot of the things that we love. So is there a right moment? And when will that right moment be? Is one of the questions I have. And if I answer, I will let you know. Thank you.
I don't want to be a talking head or half head, half body. Have you ever wondered what goes on under those tables up there? I look, what is this? We're always seeing half people, even, just a tenth of them. But in any case, that question about the two, so this is going to be pretty extemporaneous and personal. And seeing you here will change what ends up coming to my own mind, I'm sure. So the two options, the old guy planting the almond trees, was it, and the Zorba, they seem the same to me. I don't see any difference. The old man was living his life just exactly the way he loved it. He had his fingers in the soil. That's how he knew himself. And he just kept living. And why worry about dying? I'm living my life. And, when death comes, I'll deal with that. There was no kind of denial of death as I experienced that. And Zorba was really doing the same thing. He was living his life in just the way he wanted, but he wanted to squeeze more out of it. That was the difference between the two. One wanted to keep squeezing more. Reminds me of the movie Oliver, where Oliver goes up to the priests who are running this orphanage and comes up with his plate. Everybody just has a bowl of cereal, but Oliver comes up to the and he says, more, please, more. And I often use that metaphor with people that I meet in therapy. You want more, you just want more. And that's kind of Zorba, who's no little orphan though. The first time I encountered death was, I was delivering newspapers. I was about 8 or 9 years old, maybe 10, I don't know, something like that. And I was at the little grocery store. I was usually halfway through my route. I'd stop in and get a little candy bar for a penny. Whole candy bar for a penny. You can't do that for $1 now. So I was going down. It was very familiar. My mother was actually working in that same grocery store, not at the time. She made 75 cents an hour. So I was coming out, and there was this old man coming toward me. And there were 2 steps down, these old wooden steps, this New England market. And I stepped down, and he stepped up onto the first one, and I stepped down from the top one. And he looked at me. And then he was dead. He fell over dead right in front of me. And I, of course, ran in and said, let's call the ambulance or whatever. But that was my first immediate encounter. Next was my mother's telling me that my grandfather had died, her father had died. And he was in in a nursing home, a place for cognitive care, people with dementia. And I remember coming in the house and the laundry was right at that entrance. And she said, "Grandpa has died." And I said, "You're kidding me." And she snapped at me. And it was just like, I didn't know what else to say. I could have said, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe it." But I didn't. And then the other person was Paul, who died. The next person that was really significant to me was Paul, my analyst. He had cancer. He even showed me after we, well, I should say something had happened. When I had gone to do my first lecture abroad in 1978, and I'd been in therapy with Paul, analysis with Paul, and when I came back, I said, can I continue? And he said, no. He said, "I'd like you as my colleague." And we became really close friends. He had cancer. And I didn't realize it until after he died. I didn't realize that he knew I didn't have a father. And he knew how much Clark-Mastakis had meant to me before I met Paul, and he knew how much he meant to me. And he just didn't want me to get that intensely involved with him. And so he made that offer. And as we became friends, he kept asking me, because I collect books, too many, and he kept asking me to buy books on suicide. And I said, well, why are you looking for all these books on suicide? He said, I had a friend who committed suicide in France, a really dear friend. And I wasn't paying attention. I knew he had cancer. He had showed me the lines they had made on his stomach, and he had decided he did not want treatment. He didn't want to go, because he had some chemotherapy or radiation therapy that just was unbearable. And so that's the question for me, and what we've all been talking about is it worth living if you're not yourself? If you're not the self you know yourself to be? If you can't have the things that you love? I understand that we have to let go of so much. A Buddhist monk, famous Korean monk, was asked, what is enlightenment? And he just said, loss upon loss upon loss. And I think letting go upon letting go upon letting go. And you've all, I'm sure everyone here has had to let go of things. It might not be just people, but it might be capacities, it might be opportunities, it might be dreams, all these things that we have to let go of. And of course, death is the final letting go. And knowing that we'll have to let go, to be able to accept that. But does that mean to surrender to it? Before, like Evenia, you just kept living. I mean, you faced all this hardship, and yet you just kept living just the way you want to. You're not only like Zorba, but you're like the gardener as well. They seem so much like the same thing. And so I wonder about that piece. And one of the things that has struck me a great deal has been the death of Ivan Ilyich. I've read a couple of times since knowing that this conference was coming. And I ended up when Evenia was in New Mexico at a conference, humanistic psychology conference, and we saw and heard about it. There's Kurosawa's version of The Death of Ivan Ilyich, which changes some things about it. It's considered one of the greatest movies ever made. It's about 2.5 hours. And there's a man who gets a diagnosis of cancer. He has 6 months to live. He can't believe it. He goes out and takes all his money, and he has somebody, a young man, show him how to get drunk and see whores and get, sing and whatever. And he realizes that's not it. And this young woman befriends him, and he really just wants to be with her. He's not attracted to her or interested in her sexually, but she's worried that he's infatuated. He said, I'm not infatuated with you, I'm infatuated with your life. You're lively. I feel alive when I'm with you. And she, of course, it ends up having to turn him away. And but she works in this, after she had worked in the factory with him, as Ivan Ilyich had a factory, and she's now working in this toy factory, and she's making these little dolls, and he says, at one point she's showing him this little doll, and she's playing with it at the table, and they're not going to see each other anymore, and you see, there's nothing said, but you see this light come into his eyes. Children. And there was a group of women who'd been trying to get a playground made by the city, and they just couldn't do a thing because the bureaucracy wouldn't let them. And he said, children. And he goes and he finds that file in his papers, in all this stack of papers. And he spends the rest of his life fighting, which is not very long, fighting to get that one thing made. And the movie closes with him. Just as he died, he was singing. He actually was sitting in the snow on the swing of this thing, and he was singing this lovely song to himself. And that's how he died. It's quite powerful because it also shows the people in the factory who thought, oh, this is the way to live. He's an inspiration to us because he was no longer the same. He was bold. He just kept fighting for those women and the children in that neighborhood. And they said, oh, we're all going to do this work. He's our hero. And then they go back to the government building. And a moment comes when they could have done something like that, and they didn't. One man stood up and said, but sir, to the replacement, but sir, and everyone looked around, looking down. So it's that it was choosing to live for him. It was just, is what Heidegger calls Augenblick. This moment, this call of conscience, where one says, this is who I am, this is who I want to be, this is who I can be. And I haven't, I realized both of them, and then there's another movie I want to mention, but he realized I've wasted my life. This young woman said her nickname for him was Zombie, and he got her to say it. He's there, but he's not there. He's not alive. He's a ghost. He's a zombie. And so an easier movie to watch, and it's available now, is Living by Ishiguro, who it's the same story. It's an hour and a half instead of 2.5 hours. It's just such a beautiful. I've watched it now 3 times, and I just weep at the end every time this comes, when I see him sitting there swinging, knowing that he claimed his own life, his own most life, and he did what he could do in those 6 months, and he was ready to die. He knew he was going to die. So I wanted to mention those 2 movies, but the paper I'd written was about that story of Ivan Ilyich and how it's been redone now twice. So Ishiguro Kurosawa made a version, the Japanese version of from 1952 of The Death of Ivan Ilyich, but much improved, frankly. And as much as Tolstoy was a magnificent writer. But the other movie is Ishiguro's version of Kurosawa's version. of the death of Ivan Ilyich. So the question for me is how, and I'm sort of avoiding the real issue here, which is that my first personal encounter with death was getting run over by a car in 1980, and they didn't know I was going to live. And I was in a coma, and I could hear the doctor saying, "Is going to make it?" And I was in, "Hey, wait a minute! I'm here! I'm still alive! What the hell are you talking about?" And of course, I could hear everything that they were talking about, but I did make it. They said I'd never walk, I'd never climb in mountains. I couldn't run anymore, but that changed my life. That encounter with death really changed my life. I probably would never have started writing without it, or thinking in the way that I do. But Paul's death changed my life. Oh, my last meeting with Paul, I was in denial about his dying. He had he called and said, "Yeah, I can't see him today for your meeting," but I didn't get the message. So I was at his office, and he was a little annoyed, and he said, "Come on up, let's talk for a while." And so we did. This was just a collegial meeting of therapy, and then we walked downstairs. And just as we went to the door, as I was going out, he just put his hand on my arm like that, which I'll never forget. And he said, "Take care of yourself." Those were his last words to me. So last words to other people are different from last words on the deathbed. But those were really striking. One more story about death. I don't know what the point of this is. I think you're going to have to tell me what I told you. Like, Will, that's a great idea, Will. My mom had a nervous breakdown after I was born. My twin sister and I were born, and she was gone for 6 months. I have no idea what happened those 6 months. I had no father. I found my father about a year ago. First time. Guy was a boxer in Portland, Maine. And oh my gosh, what a family that would have been. But anyway, she went and raised the two of us alone. And then once we went off to college, she became quite a remarkable woman. She became a reporter and a photographer, and she was well known. She was acknowledged that this was a woman from nowhere and from nothing, as I was. And she became Citizen of the Year in the village, in the city. And she became the Sportsman of the Year because she took so many pictures of all the teams. And she really got into the community, and she was so well known. Hard to know, impossible to know, actually. All these secrets. But my sister was taking care of her. My sister told me, because she loved this town and she loved the kids and the sports and everything. And my sister told me that the night before she died, she was singing over and over to herself, "Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the park. I don't care if I ever come back." I don't remember the rest of it, but it's really like, I'm ready to go. And she was singing that over and over the night before she died. She died at 6 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, thank you.